Hi and welcome to Check Your Thread, the podcast that will help you sew more sustainably. My name's Zoe and I'm obsessed with sewing. I've been blogging about it for over 14 years and I'm the creator and host of the popular handmade wardrobe challenge, Me Made May. But like many people, I've become increasingly concerned about the climate crisis and the way that my lifestyle contributes to it. So in this podcast, I'll be nerding out about making clothes whilst exploring how to minimise the negative impact that it may have. I really hope you'll join me on this journey. Are you interested in natural dyeing, but you have questions? Are you concerned that it's going to be a massive faff and require a big initial outlay? Return guest and natural dye expert Amy Taylor is on this episode and she breaks it all down. She answers all the questions submitted by the Check Your Thread listeners about natural dyeing, including how you can get started using just stuff you most likely already have in your kitchen. So stay right where you are for that shortly. So how are you doing so far this week? As you can hear, I'm not quite so broken by hay fever, I'm happy to report. Plus, I'm riding high on having almost finished my patchwork denim quilted jacket project. I've been sharing updates on my Instagram feed and I cannot wait for it to be done and on my body. It's been an incredibly enjoyable and satisfying project. However, I'm looking forward to some quicker projects and some more instant gratification with my next endeavours. Sustainability news. On the off chance that you haven't already, make sure to mark your calendars on the 20th of May because it's World Bee Day. Officially recognised by the UN since 2018, the 20th of May is the day that we can use to recognise the absolutely essential role that bees and other pollinators play in our survival. Simply put, without bees, we would starve. So what can you do to give the bees and other pollinators some love this week? Can you go to your local garden centre and buy a couple of plants? Or sow some seeds for pollinator-friendly flowers? If you don't have a garden, could you grow them in a pot or a planter on a window ledge or by your front door? I'm planning to make some bee hotels with my kids this week for the species of solitary bees. Plus, I'm going to sow some seeds for some more sweet peas that I'll know they'll love since the bloody snails chomped my first batch. Let me know what bee-friendly actions you're going to take this week. I would love to hear. This week, a lovely person named Melissa took the Check Your Thread friendly action of signing up to support it via Patreon. Thank you, Melissa. If you'd like to help this podcast survive and dare I say thrive, please sign up for any amount you can via the link in the show notes in your podcast app or via the website checkyourthread.com. Back to today's episode. This one is a beast, coming in at an hour, but it is packed full of value, so I promise it'll be worth your time. If you haven't already listened to the first episode with Amy on this podcast, please pop this one on pause and go back and listen to episode 13. That one is the perfect primer to today's episode and to Amy herself. As you hear in both these conversations, Amy gives such clear explanations and has enormous enthusiasm for her topic, which I absolutely love. This one is a Q&A in which Amy answers lots of excellent questions submitted by Check Your Thread listeners. She answers all of them in a really accessible way, so if you have ever had any questions about natural dyeing, then the answer is quite possibly in this episode. In particular, I really enjoyed hearing how you can get started with stuff you already have in your kitchen, making it far more viable and affordable than I realised. Plus, you'll hear about the adorable mutual fangirl relationship that she's struck up with another previous guest, Bella Goncharovich. Amy also explains more about the fascinating project she undertook with her dad. That was exploring how natural dyeing lies at the intersection between art and science, which was so cool. And see how I've managed to shoehorn in yet another mention of the seed swap that I attended earlier this year. There's all the links to everything we mentioned in the show notes, plus some pics, including the naturally dyed rainbow of yarn that I saw at the seed swap. Take care, have a great week, and enjoy! Do you know your previous episode was episode 13, and this is going to be like 87 or something. Isn't that wild?
So cool, and congratulations.
Thank you. And I was like, 13? I've got as far as 13. Check me out. And I was like, whatever.
Yeah, and now it's like, oh my God, you're getting close to 100, like in TV, that's syndication.
I know. No, it's like, it makes it very real. Anyway, how have you been?
Good, busy, Tired, the usual. How about you?
I'm good, thank you. So I'm going to recommend, obviously, in the introduction that everyone pause right now and go back and listen to episode 13 if they haven't already, because that is such a good introduction, not only to your lovely self, but also to the topic of natural dyeing.
Agreed. And like understanding some of the basics that I think a lot of the questions we received today are follow-ups to a lot of those topics. So I think it'll give listeners a good foundation or a good jumping off point into the questions we're addressing today.
Absolutely. So people have already had the privilege of meeting you because they would have heard episode 13. So what's been going on with you since then? Like, what's new?
Yeah, so that one aired, I think, around October 2021.
God, is it that long ago?
So, yeah.
That's wild.
So the big things are I've started teaching at Columbia College here in Chicago, a local art school, which has been super fun. And that has been just such a joy and a really new experience of like teaching for grades instead of just for funsies. But the students are outstanding. And this has easily been one of my favorite jobs I've ever had.
Amazing. What are those hours? Is that like full time? What is that?
No, I'm part-time adjunct. It's been like 11 or 12 students once a week, and the class is 5 hours long. It's through the fashion department under their sustainable fashion minor. So we get a lot of students who are working to either like be fashion designers or work on the sort of back end of fashion design. Mm-hmm. But one of the big joys I have with them is, I mean, they're just so creative and enthusiastic to learn, but they have this, I don't know, excitement about the future of fashion that's really contagious. And I love that from the start of their career, from early on in their education, they're already starting to incorporate sustainability in their designs, in how they address the business side of it. So instead of being like, oh, I have this business, how can I backtrack and make it more sustainable? They're bringing in this need from the get-go
before they've even started a business or even got their first job.
Exactly.
That is very hopeful.
Yes, they make me excited to work in the fashion industry. And then outside of there, I released a new line of garments. They're sort of like dresses, tunics. They're naturally dyed, made out of raw silk. I still need to get more on top of it and get them onto my website better. But that was really fun to design and release. And I'm currently in the R&D phases of developing dye your own underwear natural dye kits.
Love that.
My intern and I have been testing some colors, testing some fabrics, getting ready to price everything out and photograph, document, social media, get those released.
That's amazing. So will those kits involve undies or will they involve fabric to make undies?
No, they will be the fully sewn underwear.
Nice, because that's an extra level.
Exactly. So my current natural dye kits, the state they exist in is they come with a silk scarf, and you can dye the scarf and you don't need to invest in any new equipment. So the alum I include is food safe alum, pickling salt alum. Uh-huh. So you can mordant your scarf like in your spaghetti pot, and then you can dye the fabric in the jar that the kit comes in. So you don't need a dye only pot. So the idea with the underwear is same deal, but instead of a silk scarf, it's a pair of underwear that you can wear forever afterward.
Absolutely. That's so good. I cannot wait to see those. That's so cool.
Thank you.
I love as well. It's like almost like a next level thing, isn't it? Because it's bringing two aspects of your business that already exist and then you're fusing them together.
Exactly.
Everyone wears undies.
Everyone wears, well, surprisingly, not everyone.
Oh, okay. Good point. Not everyone. Many people wear undies.
Many people do. And when I worked a lot of like craft fairs and artisan fairs and festivals, I cannot tell you how many people would come up to me just to tell me that they don't wear underwear. And I'd always be like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, do you want a hair scrunchie? Like, I don't have a lot to offer you.
Wow. That is a too much information situation, people.
Oh, yeah. Craft fairs really bring out the wild in people.
They do, don't they? They're like, this is a safe space.
Yeah, right. Well, you are trapped in your tent. Let me tell you my life story and tell you how to run your business.
Yeah. Oh, lots of lovely unsolicited advice. Everyone loves that.
Oh, yeah. It was a whole lot. I don't do craft fairs anymore.
For these reasons.
Yeah, they're exhausting, and it's hard to successfully explain to people who are there to like have fun and shop. Like, well, here's why sustainable fashion is important. Most of your underwear is made with slave labor. That's why my underwear costs a lot, because it's not. And let me tell you, people do not enjoy discussing slave labor when they're there to drink and shop.
Sure, I'm sure. Yeah, let's keep that discussion for the gram.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Oh, wow. It sounds like you've been very busy, very excited about these things. Right, we've got to get cracking because I have an hour of your time. And my goodness, we got loads of amazing questions, didn't we?
Yes. Oh my gosh, I love them.
So thank you so much to everyone who submitted a question. Sadly, there were probably too many for us to squeeze in today, but we're going to do our best to get through as many as possible with, like giving you enough time to fully respond. So, right, let's get cracking. Okay, so this person would like to know, what are the simplest dyes and fixers for beginners? Sub-question, by fixers, I'm assuming they mean mordants.
Yeah, that's what I think too. I would also include maybe modifiers.
Right, what is a modifier?
A modifier is an ingredient that manipulates the pH of the dye and can shift the color. So some dyes, particularly dyes higher in tannin, are really sensitive to changes in pH. So if you add an acid or add a base, you can get a totally different color. And different acids and different bases can pull different colors from an ingredient. So to both expand on that and answer this person's question, I think the easiest way to dip your toes into natural dyes is to start with food safe and kitchen ingredients. That way you don't have to invest in new equipment, dye-only equipment. And so you can do everything just in your kitchen with what you've got.
I love that. I love that accessibility.
Totally. And it's also a great way to use up your food trash. I would start with a food safe alum, which is a pickling salt. You can often find it in the spice aisle. And friendly reminder for your listeners, I'm based in the United States. I'm based in Chicago. So a lot of like the brands that I recommend, I don't know how international they are.
Sure.
But I personally really like the McCormick brand alum. You just want to make sure it says potassium aluminum sulfate, because some of them don't have all three of those ingredients.
Okay.
Which is fine. You would just need to tweak your recipe. So if it's only like potassium aluminum or something like that, I'm blanking off the top of my head exactly what it is. That's fine. You just might want to use more of the salt than if it's the full kit and caboodle.
It's like a trial and error thing.
Exactly. I mean, and that's all dyes. If you ask 10 dyers how they do something, you're going to get 100 different answers.
Okay.
You're like, well, it depends. What are the variables? What are these? So just play around. But so like a good pickling salt, a good alum, and no matter what you're dyeing, whether it's synthetic dyes, natural dyes, what have you, you always want to pre-wash your fabric or scour it. There is a sort of technical fancy way to scour your fabric, which we can get into, but in a pinch, throw it in the washing machine.
Okay.
Because most new fabrics, whether you're working with already made garments or yardage or what have you, has a chemical on it called sizing, and that prevents the fabric from getting dirty and wrinkled in transit. But
Oh.
it also prevents the mordant and the dye from accessing and bonding to the fabric. So you always want to wash that off. And even if it's like a pre-loved t-shirt, like it has your oils, it has whatever. So you always want to start with clean washed fabric.
Mm-hmm.
And then again, no matter what you're dyeing with, you also want to pre-wet your fabric before it goes into any pot. This is because of something called capillary action.
Ooh.
So if you introduce dry fabric to any liquid, the fabric will be thirsty and it'll soak up that liquid. So if your liquid has an ingredient in it, if it has a pickling salt, if it has a pigment, while it's doing that initial soak, it'll soak that pigment or mordant or whatever along with the liquid. And so you're not going to necessarily get controlled even coverage.
Okay.
Whereas if you pre-soak your fabric in water, doesn't matter the temperature, it'll first soak up all the liquid by itself. And then when you introduce it to your mordant or your dye, what have you, you'll get that more even contact, even coverage.
Oh.
So what you want to do is you first want to pre-wet your fabric and then cook it for minimum an hour in your spaghetti pot with the mordant salt, with the alum salt in there. I personally like to pre-dissolve my alum just like with a little bit of hot water and then pour that solution into the pot. And when it comes to quantity, typically we talk percentage to weight of fabric. So the technical correct way is to weigh your fabric while it's dry. And so if it's, say, 100 grams of fabric, okay, you would use 15 grams of alum. If you don't have a digital scale or you don't want to be bothered, if you're dyeing small amounts of fabric in a spaghetti pot, honestly, 2 tablespoons will probably be overkill. And that's fine. You cannot over-mordant your fabric. You can only under-mordant it.
Oh, that's a good tip.
Yeah, and you can reuse your alum pot over and over and over. So you can save it and mordant more stuff in it in the future. I recommend just storing it in the fridge. And
do you need to add more?
Yeah, over time, yeah. So the general rule of thumb, and this is not an exact science, is your fabric will soak up about 50% of the solution.
Cool.
But with your alum pot, you can actually tell whether or not you need to add more alum by just tasting it. Dip your finger, give it a taste. If it tastes like plain water, add more alum. If it tastes sort of metallic and salty, you're probably fine.
Cool. Okay. I love the accessibility of this. You don't need nothing testing. No, just yum, yum, yum. That's fine.
No, just give it a taste. You don't even need a whole teaspoonful. Literally just dip your finger. So you're first going to cook your pre-wetted fabric in your alum solution for minimum 1 hour. You can cook it for more, and particularly with wool or skeins, what I like to do is cook it for an hour, then cut the heat and just let it sit overnight. I wouldn't recommend doing that for a full t-shirt or anything that you want even coverage on, because without regular stirring, the salts and the dyes will pool into the folds. So on a skein, you're not going to notice those imperfections so much. So what I also like to do is while I'm mordanting my fabric, I start with the extraction of my dye stuff. So some easy accessible kitchen dyes you can use are green and or red onion skins, just the papery parts. So after you make some food, save the papery parts. And you're essentially making onion skin tea. And you can also use leftover coffee grounds, leftover tea leaves, pomegranate skins. So eat the seeds, save the skins. You can use turmeric. Let's see. Oh, yeah. Avocado pits and skins, saffron, Those are just a few off the top of my head. I would say for anything wet, like the pomegranate skins, the coffee grounds, or the tea leaves, store those in the freezer to prevent mold. And any of the dry stuff, like the dried out avocado pits, onion skins, you can just save those in a container. And with more grainy stuff like coffee grounds, you might want to put those in like a nut milk bag or leftover pantyhose to sort of create a tea bag for them so that the grounds don't get everywhere and aren't a nightmare to pour down the sink. And you can also mordant your fabric and then dye it another day. Once your fabric is mordanted, it's mordanted forever. So a lot of times I like to just bulk mordant a lot of stuff, label that it's mordanted, and then whenever I have a leftover dye bath or something, just toss them right in to soak up the dye.
Cool.
But with onion skins in particular, I've had a lot of fun playing around with them because they're one of the ingredients that are sensitive to changes in pH. On their own, the yellow and the red onion skins dye different shades of yellow.
Right.
But some of the kitchen acid and base modifiers you can use are, on the acidic side, lemon juice, clear vinegar, and cream of tartar. And on the basic or alkalinic side, you can use baking soda or baking powder, and you'll get different colors from all of those.
Wow, that's so cool. I love that you could literally start with what is in your kitchen. Like, you might not have the pickling salt. Get that from the shop, then have a fun weekend.
Exactly. Different fabrics are going to take the colors differently. So one of my favorite things to do when I'm testing is I'll put in like a silk habitai, a silk noil, a Kona cotton, a hemp, a velvet, a wool. And so that's 6 fabrics. You'll get 6 different colors from all of those.
Do you know what? We've got a question related to that.
Yes.
This question is saying, do natural dyes bond with various fibres differently? You're saying yes. And if so, why?
Yeah, so great question. I'll try not to get too in the weeds because this is a pretty huge question. So feel free to pull me back. So the first sort of big separation of categories between fibers is cellulosic or plant-based versus protein or animal-based.
Yes.
So some examples of cellulosic or plant-based fibers are cotton, linen, hemp, pineapple,
Tencel.
Yeah. Some rayons, but a lot of rayon. Rayon used to be made out of wood pulp, but now a lot of it's also made from oil.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's nasty. So I try to avoid dyeing rayon just because I never really know.
Modal.
Yeah, exactly. And then on the protein side, it's primarily like silk and wool. The wool doesn't matter, alpaca, sheep, whatever.
Mm-hmm. So it's like animal versus plant, effectively.
Exactly. And the animal fibers are always going to take dye better than the plant-based one.
Interesting.
So I won't get too deep into the science yet.
I know you're so tempted.
A good way of thinking about it. I'm so tempted.
No, we can do another episode in the future. Don't worry, we can come back. Yeah.
Just deep science. But essentially, protein fibers are extroverts. They want to invite everyone to the party. They want to hang out. They want all the color. The more, the merrier. Plant-based fibers are introverts. We can get there. They do like the company. They just need a little bit more time, a little bit more cajoling, a little bit more like, hey, buddy, let's get some color in there. And then further within that, like creating sort of more legs within those categories is the density of the fiber makes a difference. So, for example, a thin quilting cotton is going to dye very differently than like a heavy, thirsty linen.
Okay.
And then even within further subcategories, the weave of the fabric is also going to influence it. So if you have a mercerized cotton versus a twill cotton, those are also going to take color differently.
Okay.
All fabrics will take color differently. And that's why I always recommend testing. I'm such a testing nerd. My binders are epic.
I have no doubt.
Yeah. But natural dyes will bond to any natural fiber. So as long as the fabric is natural, you can get some sort of effect with natural dyes.
Cool. I just have to pop in and just say, I went to a seed swap a couple of weeks ago with my daughter. So fun. And I went previously, it's in Brighton near where I live, and I went previously, but it was still very COVID-y time, so it was just the seed swaps. It was in like a market space, which was kind of more open air. But this, because it's slightly less COVID-y times, they had loads more stalls and stuff, and there was a couple of stalls that were all about natural dye. You would have loved it. Somebody had created this like rainbow of yarns that had all been naturally dyed, and the colours were so beautiful and so vivid, so dense. It was so beautiful. And because it was a seed swap, they then had some packets of seeds that you could take for madder and woad and maybe something else. You could actually like grow your own dye stuffs. It was so fun. It was really inspiring.
I'm geeking out so hard. That is my dream. I love that you got to do that. Oh, I'm so into it.
So, another question, which you've already touched upon, which I love because you've already kind of described how inclusive this process can be into what you've already got lying around. What basic equipment do you need?
Yes. So I'm going to rattle off kind of a lot of things, but these are for creating a pretty comprehensive dye studio. So I really want to add that like these do not happen all at once. This is an accumulation over time. I literally started my dye studio with 2 pots, 1 hot plate, 2 wooden spoons, and a drying line. So everything else can be built up from there.
So presumably this is for when you get to the point where you want to expand beyond kitchen safe, food safe levels.
Correct. Yeah. For kitchen food safe levels, literally a stainless steel pot, some sort of heat source, some sort of like wood, stainless steel, rubber, plastic stirring spoon, because different metals can affect the dyes. They can play with that pH change. So we want to avoid like copper, enamel, rust, what have you. Stainless steel is always safe. And then somewhere to hang your dry fabric. But if you want to have a sort of like when you're ready to really like, I'm a dyer, I'm going to play, I'm going to do all the things. So you definitely need some sort of heat source. And if you're going away from the kitchen ingredients, you really do need to have a separation between dye only versus food stuff, because just because it's natural doesn't mean it's safe. There are plenty of natural poisons.
Good point.
So, you need to make that distinction. And I would also say if you're going to start veering away from kitchen ingredients, when at all possible, working not in your kitchen, because if you accidentally like spill some Ferris, you don't want that splashing onto your spoons or whatever.
Sure.
But so you need some sort of heat source. It can be an electric burner. It can be a camping stove. I personally, at this point in my career, my induction burner is the best piece of equipment I've ever invested in, because it holds heat really evenly. So especially for my like gigantic witch pots, it's my favorite. Stainless steel pots, you do want to stick to stainless steel because like copper pots can affect the pH of your fabric, and aluminum is a soft metal. So it will over time hold on to molecules of your various dyes and mordants and stuff. So it creates the potential for contamination. Wood, rubber, or stainless steel stirring spoons, a drying rack. I personally really like having like a hot water kettle like you used for tea. I know in the UK, it's very common for every kitchen to have one of these. In the US, not so much. I like to use that for like pre-dissolving my salts to go into the pot. Some smaller dye-only heat-safe bowls or containers like deli containers, or just things to measure out your ingredients or pre-dissolve things, or like save your leftover dye stuff. I like to use nut milk bags or like wig caps or like the feet of old pantyhose to use to hold on to my dye material to strain it out so it doesn't get mucky all over the fabric and doesn't destroy my drains when I'm washing it out. Extra buckets for like pre-soaking, and especially if you start working with iron or ferrous sulfate salts, you do need some ferrous only equipment. So I have like a ferrous bucket, a ferrous spoon, and a ferrous small deli container, because it'll contaminate everything.
Okay, so that's all just labeled up.
Labeled up, yep. Sharpies are my friend. A digital food scale to weigh out everything. In my experience, just like a regular kitchen scale that you can buy at any grocery store, 9.9 times out of 10 will get the job done. I've occasionally done projects where in testing, I've just had to measure out such small quantities like 0.01 grams that I did have to splurge and get a fancy science scale. But even then, I got it from a like science resale shop for cheap. And definitely a logbook or a dye notebook to take notes of everything you've done, because that's how you learn, and you can go back and refer to your notes. And I cannot tell you how many times where I did something just to mess around, see what would happen. And then later, either through a commission or a project I was doing, I was like, oh, I've already done this. Let me go through and see what I did before and grow from there. And then dye-only measuring cups and spoons. And I also want to say, for a lot of these things, you do not have to buy them new. So like thrift shops and especially estate sales are great places to get like the pots, the measuring spoons, the stirring spoons.
That's such a good point.
Yeah, they don't need to be new. And thrift shop too for finding like testing fabrics.
Ah, of course. Go to the linens.
Exactly. Yeah. Get the bed sheets, get the t-shirts, get the socks. Like, oh, I can't remember if it was like a secondhand shop or a vintage shop. I have found so many beautiful vintage silk nightgowns and slips that I'm like, oh, what a horrible color. Let me over dye this.
Amazing. Love that. Okay. Awesome. Thank you. Okay. So how should you care for or wash hand-dyed fabric?
Great question. So I'm sure there are a lot of people who say, oh, hand wash, delicate. You worked so hard. It's so precious. And like, yeah, I'll do that for my sweaters that all dyed, but I'm a lazy laundress. I make things that can be washed lazily. I throw it in the washing machine, delicate, cold water. The big thing is to use a pH neutral detergent, especially in the first wash.
Right. How do you know if your detergent is pH neutral?
So check the ingredients. So I like to go for the sort of like natural. I go scent free, but I'm like ferociously allergic to perfume. So like if it has scent in it, it means I don't know what else is in it. In the United States, and particularly here in Chicago, there's a brand I loved called Meliora. And I mean, like the ingredients are phenomenal. I will say, and also again here in the US, I have had Tide ruin so much of my yardage in the past at first wash. So you want to go for more of like just the greener, like again, here in the US, a brand that you can buy at supermarkets is called Seventh Generation.
Okay. So the kind of ones that you would probably find in a whole food shop.
Yes, exactly.
Right. Brilliant. Okay. Oh, good question here. Do you ever combine natural dyes to achieve a colour, or do you only use modifiers?
No, I absolutely combine natural dyes to create colors. And I'm actually currently in the middle of a massive dye test. I'm getting married in August. And so I'm, of
congratulations.
course, Thank you. I'm, of course, dyeing all of the things. So I'm in ultra massive testing mode and playing a lot with these color combinations and layering and modifications.
Wow. So it's like recipes. Well, it is recipes.
Totally. Yes, absolutely. And so when a dye bites the fabric, it's called striking. So different dyes strike fabrics at different times and intensities. So the sort of 3 ways to think about it are, let's use cochineal and marigold as an example. So cochineal is an insect that dyes in your face fuchsia, and marigold dyes the exact color you would think marigold dyes. Marigold dyes that like beautiful golden orangey yellow. And if you put them in the pot together with the pink and the yellow, you'll get a gorgeous orange. But the cochineal is a really dominant color, and it's going to strike the fabric first. So if you put them in the pot together, you're going to get a more pink, heavy orange. So that's if you put them in the pot together. Then the other way to go about it is layering the colors.
Ooh.
So you can cook it first in a cochineal and then marigold, and you'll get a really like pinky orangey coral. Or if you cook it in the marigold first and then over dyed with the cochineal, you're going to get a more yellow based orange.
So when you say over dyed, do you mean literally you take it out, you dry it, or you literally just go from one straight to the other, like within the same hour?
Yeah, and you can do it either way. So like I would take it out of the mordant pot, and I always rinse in between steps just to remove any excess. So for example, after the mordant pot, I'll just give it a rinse to rinse off any mordant that didn't bite onto the fiber, because when I later put that into the dye pot, the dye will bite that mordant that did not bite the fabric, and that's just kind of a waste.
Sure.
So yeah, you can mordant and then rinse it and then put it into a dye pot, and after the dye pot, give it a rinse. Let it dry if you want to see the color, or just give it a rinse and then put it straight into your next dye pot. As long as your fabric is pre-wetted before it goes into the next dye pot, you're good to go.
Awesome. Well, I think following very smoothly on from that is, do you ever over dye commercially dyed fabric? So presumably this is with synthetic dyes at some point in the production process of the fabric or yarn.
Oh, totally. Absolutely. The one thing to note, though, is the majority of commercially dyed garments. So whether if you're buying like pre-made clothes, almost always the thread is going to be synthetic. So even if the t-shirt will dye, if there's any visible stitching, it'll stay that original color. So it could be a cool aesthetic thing. I do it all the time, but just something to be aware of, that the stitching will most likely be visible. But yeah, all the time. There was one time, there was a sustainable clothing company here in the US. They had an offer of, it was like a mystery basket type thing. And like you pay $100 and they'll send you 5 of their garments, or I can't remember exactly what it was. You give them your size and then they pick what they send you.
Oh, wow.
And for the most part, everything was very cool. But there were 2 t-shirts that I loved the t-shirts, but the colors I thought were horrible.
What colors were they?
One of them was a smoky blue that was okay, but it just wasn't all that exciting for me. And the other one was just this like bright mustard yellow that made me look like a person who had never seen the sun in their entire life. And I was like, I cannot live in this color. I cannot wear this out in public. We're just going to over dye this in some red. In Chicago, we already have winter 6 months out of the year.
Yeah,
so
we already haven't seen the sun.
Yeah, exactly. I don't need that yellow to make it worse. So yeah, I just gave them a wash. I threw some easy designs on them and then threw them in my dye pots, and now I wear them all the time.
Amazing. So did you, I know you've been doing this for a long time, so I'm sure you had kind of loads of prior experience of this, but how did you choose what dyes to put with the pre-dyed fabrics?
Oh, just whatever mood I'm in, honestly.
Because it's going to be a level. There's going to be a level of experimentation with that, isn't there? Because there's no way you can.
Always. You know, the big thing is to just remember, like, elementary school color theory. So colors that are opposite each other on the color wheel, when combined, will make a really yucky, muddy brown. So avoid red with green, avoid blue with orange, avoid yellow with purple. And other than that, go nuts.
I love that. That's really exciting. Okay, so we had a question from previous guest Bella Goncharovich. Did you hear that episode?
I'm obsessed with her episode. I fangirled real hard. As soon as I heard her episode, I sent her an Instagram and was like, I love your work too, and immediately bought her book. And just shameless plug, if you haven't listened to her episode yet, please go and do it. There was one element of it that it influenced how I approach natural dyes now.
Really? What was that?
Yeah. So when I first started learning natural dyes, I learned very sort of methodical, rigid rules. There's a right way and a wrong way. And even when I started to learn a little bit more of the loosey-goosey, like, yeah, throw a handful in there, see what happens, I still had the teaching and the mentality of, well, if you're going to do this, only use the most color fast dyes, because why would you want to go through over dyeing it again? And I definitely like brought that to the table in my own teachings and everything. But then listening to Bella talk about using materials and using dyes that are not necessarily color fast, like with the intention and with the knowledge that they're going to fade, having that be a part of its life cycle and giving you the opportunity then to over dye it again and make it this fresh new garment, it was like a little light switch in my head of like, oh, yeah, of course.
Absolutely.
Like, it doesn't have to be rigid. It can be part of the process, and it does tie into the life cycle of nature. And so it opened my mind in a way that I was really appreciative of.
That's so lovely. I feel exactly the same in the way that, because she really embraces the concept of you can go back to your clothes. They're not fixed. They're not done. And the way she was talking about applying that same mentality to the fact, like, you've got a dress, you've had it for ages, you're a bit bored. Take the sleeves off, add a new sleeve. Take the collar off, add a new collar.
Yeah.
That really inspired me as well. It's like, yeah, just because and even if you made it or you didn't make it, it doesn't really matter. Like, you can go back. Like, nothing is stopping you.
Yeah, and her book is so good too. I keep bringing it back and forth between my studio and my home to work on like the clothing and then the recipes.
Oh, really? Oh, cool. Yeah. Oh, brilliant. Well, she's a massive fan of you too. And she asked, because you mentioned in the previous episode 13, you mentioned about a piece that you co-authored with your dad about shibori and indigo and the edge of chaos. So Is it available? Can you tell us a bit more? Is it available? Where can we get it?
Yeah, so it was available on Turkey Red Journal online, but I recently looked it up and saw that Turkey Red Journal is no more.
Oh.
Which is unfortunate because it was a really cool natural dye journal. But since learning that information, I was like, oh yeah, this is a really cool article and I would like to keep it. So I'm currently in the process of updating my website to incorporate some of the media that I've done, like this article, like my previous Check Your Thread episode. So I'm still working on it right now, but hopefully by the time this airs, it'll be up on my website.
Lovely. So you've got a deadline. You've got till May.
Okay, deal. So my dad, he's retired now, but he's a scientist. He worked primarily with artificial intelligence and population genetics. And so he used to like build robots and stuff. I don't know. Very smart man. It does a lot of stuff that I never understood. It was really hard. People are like, oh, that must have been so good to have in high school. And I was like, no, because he's too smart for his own good. And he could not dumb down the biology enough to explain my homework for me. But he was slated to give a talk at an artificial life conference in Japan. And if you hear him tell it, he'll say, well, I just wanted to bring something new to the table. And I thought incorporating your work to it would be really cool and fun to work together. If you ask me, I think he didn't want to put something together so much. And so it was like, oh, if we work together, you'll do a lot of it.
Oh, okay. Well, either way.
Either way, it was really cool for me to get to, A, work with my dad, but B, really work on the science element of it and like be able to share this project with people who like maybe never considered textiles other than getting dressed in the morning. So, because most of the time when I'm talking to people, they have at least some passing interest in fabric. So to go talk to a lot of like robotics people and physicists, and to be like, hey, let's talk about natural dyes and how it applies to chemistry and science and physics and cellular automata.
How was it received?
Really well. And it was really cool, too, because we originally presented it in Japan. But then later, when I was back in Chicago, I was talking to Pamela Feldman, who ran Turkey Red. And she was the one who invited me to submit it for publication. And so it was really neat having to translate our work for two really different audiences, because when we were presenting it to the scientists, most of them have very high level knowledge of mathematics. And so we were able to get into the weeds a bit more on that end. Whereas with the dyes was much more like, here's indigo, here's shibori, here's why they're neat. Whereas when we were submitting it for Turkey Red, I was like, we have to submit this with the assumption that a lot of people reading this maybe haven't taken math after high school. So how do we simplify the mathematics enough that they're accurate, but also understandable?
Wow. Therein lies the problem.
Was he was like, no, we have to do it this way. I'm like, this doesn't make sense outside of this understanding.
Outside of this room, no one knows what you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. But essentially, what the paper revolves around is using these sort of specific definitions of chaos and the categories within them. So within our paper, we define chaos as something that has no pattern whatsoever, whereas edge of chaos means that there is a pattern somewhere within there, but it's not necessarily obvious or even findable to humans. But it is possible that computers or robots or, machines smarter than us can figure out the pattern somewhere. And this also applies to sort of different states of being. So like ice versus water versus steam, and how these processes and definitions overlap within cellular automata, and applying those edge of chaos patterns to the process of indigo and shibori.
Wow. I can't wait to read that and figure out what.
Yeah, I know it's all very theoretical, but it's super fun.
I love it when, okay, first of all, I love that the scientific community were, by definition, you would imagine that they would be open-minded and explorative. That's not even a word. Open to exploring. I love that. I love, that there's just two completely seemingly separate worlds, but that are able to not only find a link and to find influence, and that is very inspiring. Yeah.
One, I'm such a strong believer, advocate, whatever term you want to use, that art and science are codependent on each other to be successful. Like with natural dyes, I always joke that I trick my students into learning chemistry through color. And But there was one time I actually taught a 1-day indigo workshop to a bunch of bioengineering students at UCLA. And these students are so smart. Like, they are the future inventors of the world. And it was that same interest that I mentioned earlier of like working with people who had maybe never thought about fabric, never thought about color, other than like the bare minimum of getting dressed. And so it was like, hey, we actually have this common language. Let's nerd out over the chemistry. And indigo is so instant and like quick results and satisfactory when it's done correctly. And so we literally were using like a bucket from a hardware store, 2 ladders as our drying line, and just like whatever fabric we could find. And everyone was getting their, hands blue. And it was so fun. One young woman wound up like dyeing her lab coat, and that was her lab coat for the rest of the semester.
Oh, that's so good.
And she had a trip scheduled to go to Japan. So she wound up like seeking out indigo resources and farms in Japan. And I was like, yes.
Oh, that's so good. All lab coats should be indigo dyed.
They should. They should. Well, and a way that this was phrased to me. So my dad actually worked with the head of the art sci department at UCLA, Victoria Vesna, and they did this huge bird project together called Birdsong Diamond. And the reason why they chose that title, I think, really applies sort of to this conversation. And my dad goes, as a scientist, you can look at a diamond and you can understand that it's compressed carbon, and you can do all the work to understand where this comes from and how and why. He was like, but if you shine a light through it, all of a sudden you see the prisms, you see the colors, you can see this object in a totally different way. And he was like, so that's what bringing artists into science looks like, is the artists come and they shine the light through the diamond so you can see it from this different point of view. And I think that that's really accurate between the two.
Oh, that's awesome. So linked to that, speaking of more cross-curricular involvement, gardening, as we've already touched upon. Do you have a dye garden? Have you tried growing any of your own dye stuffs?
Yes. So I unfortunately do not have a dye garden yet. I live in an apartment in a really center of the city location. There are very few community gardening plots available, and they're hyper competitive.
Sure.
But my dream is, yes, absolutely, to have a dye garden. I've tried growing and taking care of plants inside my apartment. And for reasons that I cannot pinpoint, every season my plants get 3 entirely new plagues that just wipe all of them out. And they're always different from the year before. And it's just so heartbreaking to lose all of them. So I think I need to take a pause until I have a yard.
Yeah.
But I am actually about to take a workshop of planning your own natural dye garden. There's a local dyer here in Chicago named Kristen Field. We can put her tag in the show notes because her dye garden is my goals. Like, her dye garden is just so beautiful. And she does a phenomenal job at really utilizing the whole plant. So she'll use her dye baths to dye the fabric, but then she also uses the leftover dye baths to make watercolors. And when she's planning out her dye garden, she'll use her natural dye paints to paint the flower of what's going to be put where. It's so stunning.
Oh, wow. There's so many layers to that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I'm really into gardening, and as somebody who lives on the edge of a city, doesn't have a very big garden of my own, I've just put my name on the list for an allotment, which is like a community garden. And I'm obsessed with growing food, but I really love when somebody has like focus or a specialism that they're not just growing stuff. They're like, I'm growing it for this, and this is how I'm going to explore and experiment and interact with this space and what my motivations are. And I find that so inspiring. I really, really love that.
Yeah. Well, and you can double over. And so again, different climates, I don't know everything that'll translate. But for example, I know Bella was talking about growing onions. Grow some yellow and purple onions. Save those skins.
Yeah. Well, that's the whole premise of her book, isn't it? It's like you can use these things to sustain yourself and to explore natural dyeing.
Well, and in the Midwest too, I know marigolds are very frequently used to like keep pests away, and somehow marigolds help other plants grow in ways I don't totally understand yet. But when you're deadheading your marigolds, it's better for the plant. Save those marigolds, naturally dye with them. And you use the petals itself, not the seeds. So just when you deadhead, dry out your flowers, make some marigold tea and dye your fabric in that.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's loads of things that are good for pollinators that are going to support both targets.
Yeah, here in the prairie land, like goldenrod and yarrow are phenomenal for that.
I just want to get growing so much.
I know. Oh, same.
But speaking of growing, though, Bella has another question. How do the seasons affect your dye habits or practice? Like, what are you doing in the summer? What are you doing in the winter?
Yeah, so when I'm dyeing for my business, I'll say the seasons don't affect it all that much because I have to have as much repeatability as is possible within natural dyes, understanding that no two pots ever dye exactly the same. But when it's for production or for like another business, I have to use my pre-source purchase dyes. But when I'm just dyeing for funsies on my own, I definitely have more of an abundance of ethically foraged materials in spring, summer. And there's a concept called the honorable harvest, and there are a lot of other people who talk about it.
Do you follow Black Forager on Instagram?
I love her so much. Yes, I absolutely follow her. I highly recommend following her. She has a lot of great info about the honorable harvest.
Yeah.
And also the book Braiding Sweetgrass changed my life. Every natural dyer I know is beyond obsessed with this book.
I have to read that because it's like now about like the 6th time I've heard it referenced. So
yeah, it's required reading in my class. Yeah, it's by Robin Wall Kimmerer, Braiding Sweetgrass. And she goes into much more detail about honorable harvest, and I think she has a whole chapter devoted to it. So I would say before you go out and start like picking plants in your community, do a little bit of homework about how to forage and how to harvest ethically, because you don't want to damage the soil. You don't want to take everything. Like, if we learn nothing else, it's that, like humans, our plants and our gardens live in these sort of community-based ecosystems. And so if you completely remove a whole variable, it's going to have these ripple effects that you won't necessarily predict or even see right away.
Sure.
But the basic gist of it is take what you need and nothing more.
Love that. I want to talk to you forever, but I think we should wrap up there.
Oh, okay.
And do another one next year.
Yes, totally. This is my favorite thing to talk about. I love all the questions.
Yeah. Because I honestly, I feel like we could almost do an episode on so many of those elements in and of themselves.
Let's just create a natural dye podcast.
Yeah. I don't know why there isn't one. And I don't know why there isn't a mending one as well.
Oh, man. Yeah. There's so much with men. Oh, yeah. We could do a whole other thing about that, too.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of the topics I'm trying to squeeze into Check Your Thread, they deserve their own entire podcast.
Right.
Sure.
One idea, too, I realized I want to throw in, and like, feel free to edit this anywhere in it. But for people who are first dyeing at home, This is only true of wool versus any of the other materials. But when you're dyeing with wool, obviously you can't, like if you're doing wool skeins for knitting, you can't pre-wash your skeins in the washing machine.
Right.
So what you're going to want to do is, keep it in the loop. You don't want to throw it in as a cake or a ball, but in your loop, put it into your pasta pot with some water before it's heat up. You're going to heat everything up together, but put your wool in your pasta pot with some washing up liquid. Put the heat on low. You do not want to get it to a boil because the boil will risk felting your wool. I like to keep it at the temperature so there are just small bubbles around the edge of the pot, but no more. And stirring occasionally, but not too much because, again, we want to avoid agitation and felting. Just cook your wool with the washing up liquid for about an hour again before you go into the mordant process, and that'll help remove the sizing. But then again, when you're cooking or mordanting or dyeing or what have you with wool, you want to be really mindful not to do any abrupt temperature changes.
Okay.
Because this is true of all protein fibers, but due to the length of them in wool, when we heat up the wool, it opens up the fibers. And so you can move wool from hot pot to hot pot, no problem. But if you move it from hot pot to cold pot, it'll shock the fibers and they're more likely to tangle and felt on themselves.
Oh.
So hot to hot is fine. But if you're not going to do hot to hot, pull it out of the hot pot, let it come to room temperature on its own.
Sure.
And then put it into the cooler pot.
Okay, awesome. I've just remembered we had one more additional question that I emailed you. I don't know if you got it or not.
Oh, about over-dyeing black.
Yes, I'm just going to find the actual order because I thought that was a really interesting question. Okay, here we go. This person has heard that black dye is the most difficult to obtain with natural-only resources. Do you have any tips for them to freshen up their tired black clothes without using chemicals or impossible-to-find ingredients?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And we, of course, can do a whole episode about achieving the color black with synthetic and natural dyes. Because even with synthetic dyes, as far as I know, there's no true black. That different companies use different mishmash combinations of colors to get their black. And I will say in natural dyes, black is the hardest color to achieve. I have my own recipe, but no one ever buys it because it's so expensive and labor intensive.
Okay.
My go-to is throwing it into an indigo vat, but I know that that's not the most accessible.
Okay.
So I don't have good recommendations for food safe only dyes. You are going to want to invest in at least one dye only pot and one Ferris bucket.
Okay.
But there are a bunch of ingredients you can use that when you incorporate ferrous, it'll like satin or jewel tone them. So I would go maybe Cutch, Cutch. It comes from the Acacia catechu tree. It's often used in Ayurvedic medicine as well. So if you can't get them from a dye supply, you might be able to get them from like a holistic supplier. But Cutch on its own is a brown tannin and on its own dyes a beautiful nutty brown. So if you then soak it in the iron bucket for just a few minutes. And you can get ferrous salts. You can even make your own using like rusty nails and some vinegar. And so you cook your fabric in the Cutch, pre-mordant always. Cook your fabric in the Cutch and then soak it in your iron solution for a few minutes. It should like darken or satin and blend in with the black enough. Another one you can use, though, again, I don't know if this is the most accessible dye in the world, is logwood. It's the bark from the logwood tree, and on its own, it dyes stunning royal purple, but again, is really sensitive to those changes in pH. So the combination of the logwood with the iron bucket, it won't be true black, but that dark brown, that dark purple should blend well enough to give new life to your black garments.
Awesome. Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you so much. Let's do this again.
Yes, please.
Let's cook up some more angles, because I'd like to do an entire episode with you about the gardening aspect.
Yes.
I just feel there's so much to go. And so when you've gone on your Dye Stuff gardening course, let's come back.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Oh, Zoe, thank you so much. This is always so fun.
Yeah. So good. Take care. Good luck with all the pre-wedding dyeing. I really can't wait to see how that all pans out.
Oh my God. I'm about to post so many pictures. I seriously got like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of samples dyed, like finished yesterday. Amazing. So now it's like picking which ones are going to go and then actually dyeing them.
Oh, exciting. I wish you all the very, very best, and I cannot wait to speak to you again.
Me too. I'll talk to you soon.
Take care.
Bye.
Thanks so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed this episode and are left feeling inspired. For more info about the podcast, including show notes for this and every episode, head to checkyourthread.com. I'd love to hear from you, so if you have any comments, questions or ideas for future episodes, please get in touch by emailing zoe@checkyourthread.com or find me on Instagram @checkyourthread. Massive thanks to Patrick Potter for production support, to Sylvia Seller for the awesome logo design, and to Simon at Palm Skin Productions for the music. This ad-free podcast would not be possible without listener support, so if you feel you are able, please consider signing up to the Check Your Thread Patreon. For the equivalent of buying me a coffee each month, you'll be making it possible to continue producing regular episodes. Links can be found in the show notes and on the website checkyourthread.com. I hope you'll listen again next week. Until then, take care. Bye!